They thought they had my parents cornered, a small-town bank, a crooked contractor, and a house so poorly built that doors fell off their hinges. But there was one tiny detail everyone had overlooked, a detail that would turn their world upside down in less than 5 minutes. Sometimes, the most powerful victories come from the smallest oversights. In 1973, my parents were young dreamers with just enough savings to build their first home, a modest ranch house in the countryside where they could raise their two small children. What should have been the happiest chapter of their lives became a nightmare that would test their faith, their marriage, and their sanity. The local bank approved their mortgage with confidence, and Bob, the contractor they'd hired, promised them the home of their dreams. But Bob had a secret. He was drowning in commitments across town, leaving inexperienced workers to fumble through one disaster after another. This wasn't about crooked pictures or squeaky doors. We're talking about catastrophic failures that defied logic and reason. The architect forgot to erase a line on the blueprints, so the framers built a solid wall straight through where the bathtub should go. Kitchen cabinets hung precariously from drywall, not studs, secured with nothing but roofing nails, prompting the builder to warn my mother, "Don't put anything heavy in there." The garage door? It opened directly into the living room, instead of toward the driveway. Month after agonizing month dragged by. My mother, a stay-at-home mom with two toddlers, was trapped in a cramped, deteriorating rental, while my father worked two jobs to keep them afloat. The stress was crushing them. The bank representatives were condescending and cruel. Bob was nowhere to be found. My mother cried herself to sleep. My father sank into a deep depression, questioning every decision that had led them to this point. Then came the final inspection. The bank's representative arrived with paperwork in hand, expecting signatures and celebrations. Instead, my parents met him in the front yard, and refused to approve Bob's work. His face darkened with anger. The bank had already paid Bob substantial money, and he demanded they sign off immediately. Furious, he stormed toward the front door to inspect the house himself. In one swift motion, he grabbed the doorknob and pulled. The entire door, frame, casing, and all, collapsed on top of him. It had never been properly installed. Just wedged into place, like a movie set piece. Bob finally showed up to oversee the work personally, but he proved no more competent than his crew. Still, my parents refused to sign. The house was uninhabitable, and they wouldn't be bullied into accepting it. That's when the threats began. The bank threatened foreclosure. Bob threatened to sue for breach of contract. My parents were trapped. They had their small down payment savings, but that was it. In a prolonged legal battle, the bank and Bob had all the resources. My parents had none. Desperate and exhausted, they scraped together enough money to hire an attorney. Tom was kind, but realistic as he reviewed their paperwork: plumbing disasters, electrical nightmares, structural failures that boggled the mind. My father watched Tom's expressions carefully, seeing what looked like sympathy and defeat. Then suddenly, Tom's face changed completely. A slow smile spread across his features. "Let's get everyone together for a meeting," he told my parents quietly. "Tomorrow." The next day, the conference room at the bank was crowded with adversaries. My parents sat nervously beside Tom, facing the bank's representative, the bank's attorney, Bob, and Bob's lawyer, all confident they were about to crush these small-town dreamers once and for all. Tom didn't give anyone else a chance to speak. "Well," he announced calmly, "my clients have decided they no longer want this house. Please remove it." Laughter erupted around the table. Remove it? Had this small-town lawyer lost his mind? Without a word, Tom reached into his briefcase and, in a sweeping, theatrical gesture that would be remembered for decades, placed a single document on the table. A deed. "My clients own the land this house is sitting on, outright," Tom said, his voice steady as granite. "They no longer want your house. Get it off my client's land." The room fell silent. Bob's attorney grabbed the deed, studied it in disbelief, then slowly turned to stare at his client. "You built a house on land you don't own?" Bob nodded weakly. The bank's attorney exploded at their representative. You didn't finance the land the house is on? No, came the stammered reply. Tom leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. As I said, gentlemen, you're trespassing on my client's land. I expect this house to be removed, and the land returned to its original state. At once. My father would remember those blank stares for the rest of his life. In less than 5 minutes, the entire power dynamic had flipped completely. The bank could foreclose all they wanted, on a house that would be demolished by week's end, with no way to recover their money. They didn't even own the ground it sat on. Bob was out his 50% investment, plus he'd have to pay to tear down and remove the entire structure. On top of that, the bank would undoubtedly demand repayment of their initial investment. Could they have pursued my parents legally? Perhaps. Foreclosure would have damaged their credit, and they might have lost their down payment. But signing off on that house in its current condition would have cost thousands upon thousands more, money the bank knew they didn't have, because the bank had approved their modest mortgage in the first place. The transformation was instant and complete. Suddenly, my parents were wonderful people. This was all a terrible misunderstanding. The bank and Bob couldn't do enough to help them. The house was brought into perfect compliance with the original blueprints and specifications, immediately, at no extra cost to my parents, but considerable expense to Bob. My parents signed their mortgage. Bob received the remainder of his payment, and barely broke even. The bank's representative was quietly fired. And Tom? Tom had earned himself a legendary tale of triumph that he would share with fellow attorneys for the rest of his career, the day a small oversight turned David and Goliath on its head. Sometimes justice comes not from fighting the biggest battle, but from finding the one detail everyone else overlooked. My parents didn't need to be the loudest voices in the room, or have the deepest pockets. They just needed someone smart enough to read the fine print. And discover that sometimes, the house always wins, unless you forgot to buy the land it's sitting on. In the end, they got their dream home. But more importantly, they learned that even when you feel powerless, the truth has a way of setting everything right. Sometimes, you just need the right person to help you find it.